Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Pick Swap Podcast. It's always a great day to beat the Lakers. I know, Sean, you're living it up, watching the Sixers beat the Lakers. You're not a huge Lakers guy.
Oh
No
yeah,
LeBron last night, but Embiid and AD battled. Tobias showed up. Maxey showed up. So how are you feeling after that W last night?
yeah. I was disappointed LeBron didn't play. That took a little bit of the juice out of it for me. I was definitely geared up, looking forward to see Joel and LeBron go head to head, and that's kind of what I
Yeah,
had in my mind all day. But even without LeBron there, a very big win for the Sixers. The hottest team in the NBA right now. I would say just the way they're playing. That was just a dominant win from start to finish. They held control, held the lead, kept it at arm's length. It didn't take a Joel ridiculous effort, and the Sixers still were able to win. And also pretty crazy, an off day for Joel Embiid still ends with what was it, 26 points, 9 rebounds, 7 assists, a steal, and 2 blocks. And that was a pretty
yeah,
bad performance from him by his standards. So pretty crazy there.
yeah. It was funny seeing all of those memes about that.
Hmm.
Just the fact that he's sitting like 26. He scores his 26 like in the middle of the fourth quarter. They're up by 20. And I literally was like, they showed this stat where it showed that he beat the record for most consecutive 25-point
Yeah.
performances, which he beat Iverson's record, which again is just another one of those things that he's been beating over the last couple of weeks, just setting himself in the Sixers record book forever. But he sat at 26, and I was like, oh wow, like wasn't that great of a game from Joel. And he's actually just had
Yeah.
26, 9, and 7. It's like, okay, yeah. That's the type of guy he is this year. He really is the MVP. His odds continue to go up. I know you tweeted about it, Sean. He
Hmm.
really, I mean, everything's pointing in that direction right now. Obviously, it's still January, but man, even on a night where he didn't look that good, he still was able to do some ridiculous things. He had the spin move on AD at the
Yeah.
top of the key early in the game. That was super fun. We got to the line a little bit. I thought I was actually kind of impressed, and I'm not an AD fan, but Anthony Davis played pretty well last night.
Yeah, that hurt me. I'm very much not an AD guy either. The
Yeah,
Lakers are made up of guys that I don't particularly like. Like LeBron,
yeah,
AD, and Westbrook are all guys that I like. I guess I all think are overrated in their own rights. LeBron not as much, obviously. LeBron's obviously a terrific as a basketball player and everything. AD and Westbrook, I would say specifically, I think are not as good as they're gassed up to be. But Anthony Davis proved me wrong last night as far as how well he played. He really did take it to Joel for a couple stretches there, and it's not often we see a guy just going at Joel Embiid and being unafraid of just taking those one-on-one matchups. And he was hitting everything. A couple ridiculous shots and like step back jumpers. The one that was like over the backboard, the angle he hit
yeah,
on that. And I mean, very good night out of AT. 14 for 21 from the field, 31 points, 12 rebounds, 4 blocks. I was impressed by AD. I will say that, especially from he didn't look good his first game back. He definitely looked a little like I guess just not himself yet. And last night he definitely shook out of that.
yeah. Not something I necessarily like to see, but
Yeah.
definitely something that it was notable last night. The blocks, the defense actually stood out a lot to me. He had a couple blocks, one
Yeah.
on Tyrese. Tyrese still doesn't get any respect um, from the officials. Last year he got none. Earlier this year, it kind of felt like he was turning the corner there, but there's just so many times where he goes to the basket. And I know he's quick, and I know things are happening very fast with him, but he really does not get much respect at the rim, which is frustrating. But AD sent one of his shots into the front row, which never like to see that. But
Yeah.
regardless, like you said, it was, I think the most important thing was they got out to a lead, and then they held the lead. They were up at one point 22 points. It did get down to like 15, 14, 15 at one point, but that was the lowest it got. They really handled the game well. And I mean, I don't know if that's just because the Lakers actually aren't that good. But either way, like they've played teams that aren't that good and they've let them come back. And this was a nice game to watch where it was like it never really felt like there was anything else. You know what I mean? It's not
Yeah.
like they took the lead and that felt like that was going to be it. And it was nice to see.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I agree. I don't think the Lakers are like by their standards that good this year. Like I think this is they're a little bit back from the like legitimate contenders, kind of in a similar way I feel about the Sixers, which is interesting considering the circumstances of the team with the Lakers kind of in an all in and the Sixers obviously waiting on whatever this trade piece ends up as. As far as the Maxi foul things, I agree. He still doesn't get enough respect. I would like to see him go a little stronger to the cup. I think like he does a lot of like the scoops and the underneath and like
Yeah.
the quick get offs. Like I think if he just took it up strong more often, that some more calls would come his way. And he's also, I mean, a lot of it is just purely his size. Like he is by NBA standards a fairly little guy out on the court, and going in with the trees is not always working out for him. But I do think there would be some more, I guess. He would get to the line more often. Like when you look at Joel, which obviously it's a night and day comparison for how they play in that, but the reason Joel gets to the line so strongly, and the reason that personally I don't have an issue with it, where I do with a lot of guards when I see like the baiting, is oftentimes Joel is just going strong. Like there was a play last night where he got the guy on a pump fake and step through, and it's just like he's putting his arms out there to get hit versus like he's creating the foul. And there he does get the cheesy kind of jump shots often too. But
Yeah.
I think there would be something to that if Maxey could just, I guess, be more willing to take the contact, go up strong, and just earning the foul, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's hard to like, again, I think another point is, like, he just is going so fast.
For sure. Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and he's like I think a lot of times he's learning to avoid the block, and that almost then in turn is avoiding contact, right? Like,
Yeah.
he's moving the ball so he doesn't get blocked, and he's not as tall or not as lengthy as these guys, so he I mean, he's been struggling from the field, I guess, like, in kind of general over this stretch. I mean, he's what, 5 of 14 last night, I believe. Um,
Yeah.
you can check me on that, 5 of 14, which, like, again, isn't awful, isn't the worst thing in the world, but you just want to see those numbers get up a little bit. And I don't think it's because he's taking bad shots.
Mm-hmm.
I just think some of them aren't falling. So are you digging into that at all?
Not really. 2 of 6 from 3, which I actually really like. That's the second, or tied for Niang for second most attempts. Danny Green had 7. I liked what I saw from Danny Green last night. That was the most refreshed I think I've seen
Yeah.
him all season, pretty much. Like it's been a weird Danny Green season with him in and out of the lineup, but good to see him just the Danny Green willing to fire. 7 3-point shots in 16 minutes is great out of Danny Green. But back to Maxey. I mean, I'm not concerned as far as like there hasn't been as much up and downs as that I would have expected coming in, as far as like the role that he has, the usage he has, the what he's expected to do. For the most part, he's been solid. And like I was talking a little bit last night during the game about like we were talking about the Lakers with Westbrook and just like the fit issues there. And there was a play where Westbrook kind of just bullied Maxey into the paint, got a layup, and gave a stare down. And I was like, I don't even think this is like a controversial take. Like I think Maxey has been more solid than Westbrook this year. And I do think that, which I think is very interesting considering the career arcs there. I mean, first career double-double last night for Maxey, 14 points, 10 assists. Is glad to see the assists get there. Like there's often time for a guy that passes the ball as well as he does, who takes care of the ball as well as he does. The assist numbers are not always there. Like there's a lot of like 4 assists, 5 assists, 6 assists kind of nights. So cool to see him actually secure a double-double. He's had 7 games with 8+ assists, but never quite notched that. So I was happy for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joel joked about it after the game, saying
Yeah.
thank you for finally being a point guard, which is funny in classic Joel fashion, very funny. But yeah, I mean, how much more are you asking for from Maxey? Not that much. He's done everything that they've asked him to do. He's sitting at 40%, plus 40% from 3. Like, yeah, I don't know. Like the expectations that we had for him were high. I think he's met them,
Hmm.
maybe more so in different ways. But yeah, last night was a good game from him. Solid game. Again, you'd like to see him shoot a little bit better from the floor, but like 5 of 14 isn't the worst thing in the world. So, but when you look at the rest of the team, you kind of mentioned Danny Green, you mentioned George Niang shooting well last night was
Very good.
nice. When he's
Yeah.
on, it's very fun. Love to see him talk a little bit of smack like he does.
Always.
Um,
Always.
but before we get to those guys, because we should talk about them very briefly, but Tobias Harris,
Hmm.
probably the best back-to-back performances from him. He had 33 the other night. He had 23 last night, but he looked really good last night. He just
Yeah.
looked comfortable. He just looked confident. And we mentioned this before on the last podcast. He's just looking a little bit more in stride. Is that something that you see him like hopefully continuing, or is this just something that we're getting to and maybe hit another bump in the road?
Yeah, I think he's on the upswing. I think like there's always like an evening out with NBA guys within a season, and I think there's like like Tobias Harris is not as bad as the stretch of games that he has played. So I think there will be an uptick to kind of even out the numbers and how he looks and everything. The Sixers are a different team when Tobias Harris is playing well. Like when you think about having a legitimate second option to play off on beat, like he had 33 the night before. Last night he ended with 23. which like that's perfectly fine. 23 points out of Tobias Harris on a nightly basis is
Absolutely.
what you're hoping for. That's very solid. And I mean, he looks stronger to me. Like he looks like he's going at the rim, attacking the basket with more like willingness to take contact. He had a nice little spin move early on. It looks like better. He's also been quicker with his decision making, which is honestly the key for Tobias. For me, that's the number one thing I look for when he's making decisive decisions. When he's not doing all his little jerks and fakes and semi spins and half spin. Like when he's just attacking, that's when he's at his
Yeah.
best. He's been quick, he's been decisive, and that's what the Sixers are looking for.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that. I think when Tobias is um like, and I think this goes back to his confidence. I think
Yeah.
taking jumpers when he's like, okay, I'm wide open. I have to hit this. There was one last night that I kind of just like rolled my eyes at where he came off a, I don't know if it was like a V cut or a screen or something, and he caught it like on the near the corner, like between the wing and the corner, and he like immediately pump faked,
Hmm.
and there was no one near him, like no one
Yeah.
near him, and then he like was off balance and shot it and missed. But that
Yeah.
was the only time last night where I was like, all right, Tobias, like come on. And I think again, that's just the confidence level. I don't think like, I don't know, man. The three has looked like it's coming off a little bit better out of his hands. He's just way more quick, like catch the ball up and out, which is what you need from him. You don't need the, the jab steps and the pump fakes and the, the Carmelo Anthony moves. You don't need that from him. It looks like the post ups are more concise, which I think is a really big deal. Just not spending, 10 seconds of the shot clock trying to figure out whether or not you can find a shot against a smaller defender. Just, when the mismatches are there, take advantage of them. When they're not, move the ball. He passed the ball really well last night, and he's done a better job at that. And again,
Yeah.
rebounding wise, he's been very good as well. So, you know, I think a lot of people get confused and like sometimes I feel like I'm almost rooting against Tobias. I'm never rooting against Tobias. I want him to be good. I really do.
Yeah.
He hasn't been, but this stretch has been encouraging, and I'm hoping this is what we see from him. And I mean, I'm not saying that there isn't a better player or a better fit out there that they could get, but if this is the version of Tobias Harris they're getting, like you said, this team's much better when he's playing at this level.
Yeah, no, 100%. I also think Matisse Thybulle, an excellent game out of him last night. I think he's been missed, and his presence has definitely been felt since he returned. He was still working his way back in the game before this in the Pelicans matchup, but last night there was the one eye popping steal where he just like snatched that out of the air. He ended 8 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, and 4 steals, which is a crazy stat line, and that's a very
Yeah.
Matisse line. But he was impactful on both ends. His cutting has gotten so much better since he's been in the league, and I'm like doubling down on the take of that importance next to Embiid. I mean, you see when they bring the two at Embiid pretty strongly, which they did pretty much all night last night, pretty much off the catch. They kind of brought to it, especially in that second half. Like those are just free baskets. Those are just wide open in the
Yeah.
middle, and Matisse was capitalizing on those. A couple tough finishes on them too, and
Yeah.
I mean that's huge for his offensive like just value going forward. Being able to do that, finding a way to capitalize on his like athleticism and that kind of thing is awesome.
Yeah, I think that's his niche right there. That's
Yeah.
where he can find a way to hurt the defense as an offensive player, and that's really all you like. That is what you need from him. Obviously, it'd be nice for him to shoot a little bit better from three, but he's looked confident when he's catching and shooting. It's still not the best jumper in the world, but it's there. It's not ugly. And again, it's something he's going to continue to work on, and I think him being able to find that value offensively is great. Defensively, what more can you say, man?
Yeah.
Uh, you can't be lazy around him. You really can't make mistakes on like any level. Between the Russell Westbrook and like the pick at half court, where he just jumped like it didn't even look like a video game. It looked like a cartoon the way that he just extended up in the air and picked that ball off and then threw a nice pass to Tyrese. And then the other one, Malik Monk tried to pass it out to AD, snatch and then a huge
Yeah.
dunk. He's so like his jumping ability like actually confuses me at times. The way that he just like glides is so impressive to me. And to go back to talk about his relationship, the way that he's been cutting, it also I think is a testament to Joel. And one, the way that he's been passing, but two, and this is something we talked about a while ago, is like the way that he's controlling the game and the way that he's seeing the game. There was a replay that they showed last night where Embiid got the ball and Niang tried to cut and go away.
Yeah.
And he yelled at him. He said, "Stay there, stay there, stay there." He took one dribble. Stanley Johnson doubled. He kicked it to George. He hits a three. It's like that's just enough to know, okay, this is what the Lakers are going to do. Here's what I'm going to do. And then here's what you're going to do, which is a really, really incredible thing to see Joel break down the game on that level and just know what he's doing and, see the floor and see the game before it happens, which is really incredible from him.
Yeah, absolutely, and it was very similar to the Tobias play from the couple nights prior, where there's like the same setup of him kind of on the low block with Niang. It was on the opposite side of the court this time, but Niang was just like not at the top of the three, but a little bit off to the right, and just him the knowledge to be like, all right, if he doesn't come down, I'm taking this guy 1-on-1. If he does, which I think he will because he has all game. Here you go. Here's an open three. And
Yeah.
as long as they surround him with guys that can just knock that down, it was great that Niang was hot. I love when Niang's hot. Probably more. He might even have taken my heart for Furkan for how much I feel it when they're hot. Niang this year, which I love it, and it's so cool. Joel, like even last night, it's so crazy to me. Like last night was a pretty poor game from Joel standards. Not poor, but it was not a great game from Joel standards, and he still was so effective. Like there were a couple passes. He had the one that he squeezed in on a cut baseline that was a ridiculous pass, and I mean
The pass of Matisse between the legs. Between AD's like, come on, man.
Yeah. Just crazy the stuff he's doing. But I also would like to say I am all in on the Shaq versus Ben Simmons drama, and Shaq really went in on Ben Simmons and shouting out Joel Embiid. So I would like to give out a shout out to Shaq for that and just everything he said. Not even saying Simmons' name, really pissed off about Simmons, and I was loving it. About time somebody says it.
Yeah, I was about to bring that up because I thought that was going to be the last thing we could talk about. He is, I mean, Shaq and Charles Barkley and those guys went from, criticizing Joel saying, got to stop shooting the threes, got to get in the post, got to, start playing like an MVP, got to start playing like a dominant guy. And then all they did last night was gush over him. And I don't normally like the national broadcast. I don't normally like the nationally televised games because I don't like to hear that stuff. Like I'm seeing the game. I see Joel every night. I know that they're not seeing Joel every night, but man, I was really happy to see him get that national recognition, even in a game where he, like you said, he didn't play that great, but all they did was say, he's the baddest guy in the league. He's the most dominant player in the league right now. He's doing everything. He's carrying this team, and his co-star, not coming around and not being there. So I like that Shaq took the time to not only praise Joel, but to also, call out the situation. And I think that type of thing really helps push the narratives, the correct narratives. And last night I think was the correct narrative. And in recent years or in recent times, it's felt like, they've taken that time to kind of cut Joel down. It was really nice to see them lift him up that last night.
Yeah, definitely. And there was some corniness with as far as the national broadcast, and they're talking about like Joel being just wanting it more and being like more proper on social media and stuff. I'm just like, like you don't gotta be all corny with this. Yeah. But as far as like the direct Simmons and Embiid thing, absolutely. And I also it's been back-to-back nights where Shaq has kind of gone on Ben Simmons, and the night before especially, I was very impressed with. I appreciate the love for Tobias Harris, I guess. Like when Shaq was saying how he was really saying how like nobody wants this guy, like just get him out of here, all this about Simmons, and then he's like, I don't want to hear the criticism of Tobias Harris. Like Tobias Harris plays with heart. Tobias Harris hasn't quit on his team, all this, which I do think he deserves that love. I appreciate that there's a little bit of, I guess, just sensibility in the situation there, and I do think, and the situation as a whole, with all the drama, with all the rumors, everything, it does get brushed over too much that like this guy is really being like not a good dude in the like Ben Simmons is in the wrong for how he's handling this, and I do think that gets brushed over too often.
Yeah, I think so too. And he got 2 player votes for the All-Star game, which is I don't know who those players are. I really do want to know. It's got to be. I'm trying to even think. He can't be a very liked guy across the league. Do you think?
I can't imagine. Like, it's one thing. I mean, this is such like a unique situation. Like, we've never seen a player with this type of contractual obligations, like holding out for this long, that kind of thing. But I can't imagine that's looked at in a positive light by a lot of people. Like, I know. I mean, the Sixers specifically, who are the guys that I would imagine he's closest with. Not that. I mean, there's been all the whispers of like him not really being into like team things, and like they would go out to team dinner and he would sit at his own table, that kind of thing. So I don't know how close he was with the Sixers specifically, but like if those are your guys, like I think back to when they tried to fly out to talk to him in the summer and he just said like no. Like that's like there's been so many like just opportunities to handle this better that just haven't been, and I can't imagine that around the league that's viewed positively.
No, definitely not. Definitely
Yeah.
not. But I mean, the Sixers are winning basketball games, man.
Yeah.
It's incredible that they've been able to uh, not even just hold their head above water, but they're right there in the mix. Like
Yeah.
I was looking at the standings last night. What a weird year, bro.
Big time.
The Heat, the Cavs are third in the East right now. They have 30 wins.
Cavs are
The
legit.
Bucks, yeah, the Bucks are down and the Nets are down and Sixers are, yeah, just a weird year altogether. So, take it with a grain of salt. It is what it is, but Sixers are winning basketball games, and that's what's important. And Embiid mentioned that in his post game last night. They're saying, "Are you chasing the MVP?" He said, "In order to be the MVP, we got to win."
Yeah.
So really, I'm focused on winning, which is great to hear. But to wrap this segment up, we are going to move into the interview that you did. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, A. Kelly, a Hawks reporter, we're having on. I talked to him for a while. Talked a little bit about the John Collin stuff, just all the rumors, and basically how John Collins would fit on the Sixers, the interest in him, and just what's going on with Atlanta. Been a very weird year out of them too after the meltdown, and talks a little bit about the perception of Ben Simmons, which I thought was an interesting talk too. But it definitely sounds like there's some smoke going around in Atlanta as far as like how they've played, how the things have gone. So it was an interesting talk, and I think you guys will like it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fun little interview series that we've been going on. Sean, we appreciate that work all the time, obviously. So check that out. Stay tuned for that. Obviously, we'll be back next week to talk about more Sixers. Obviously, you can check out Sean at Sean_Bernard1. Check out me at JSBrain17. Check out the pod at PickSwapPod. Follow the YouTube. Get our podcast anywhere you get your podcast. Check out this little interview that Sean and A. Kelly did, and we'll talk to you guys afterwards.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Pick Swap podcast. I'm here with a special guest, Andrew Kelly from Peachtree Hoops, who's a Hawks reporter. So I'm excited to talk with him today. Andrew, how you doing today?
I'm good. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, man. So I want to dive in. I mean, there's so much going on with the NBA, with the rumblings and the connections, and the Hawks and Sixers are certainly a team involved with that. But before we get into that, I mean, obviously there's the history of the Hawks and the meltdown that happened in the playoffs. I don't want to get too deep into that because of how much it hurts me on a personal basis. But how do you feel about the state of the Hawks at the moment?
Well, it seems like they've basically done like a 180 since the playoffs. I mean, they had the highest of heights pretty much. I mean, this is a team that's only been to 2 conference finals since moving to Atlanta. So it's very rare they even get that far. So high expectations entering the season, obviously. Most people had them projected for like 3rd or 4th in the East. And then right now they're just under the play-in line. So they have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, definitely. And that's been a surprise to me as well. I mean, dating back to the postseason last year, that was obviously a series that the Sixers were expected to win. But I do think that and I think the core of the loss was mainly on the Sixers imploding. But I do think the Hawks were a better team than they were given credit heading into that. And I personally had higher expectations than I've seen this year. So before we dive too deep in, it is a little bit funny that there have been the linkings between Ben Simmons and the Hawks with me, just because of how, I guess, what a microcosm that series was to Simmons' career. So what would you say kind of the perception of Ben Simmons is across Hawks fans and Hawks personnel and Atlanta in general?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely is some irony that the Hawks have been one of the teams like most tied to Simmons since he had that obviously infamous meltdown against him in the playoffs. But overall, I mean, when you have the season that the Hawks have had to this point, there's always going to be a keen interest in shaking it up some. The Hawks have also had a lot of young guys, a lot of veterans that could be used in trades. So they've always been kind of well positioned to make an eventual consolidation trade of some kind where they, flip multiple assets into like a piece that could play with Trae Young for the remainder of his prime. Generally, you're targeting, a top 40-ish type player for that. And Simmons certainly fits that bill. I did a pod last night, too, where I talked a little bit about Simmons. And I think that the perception of him is probably too low right now. I mean, I think when people, they had the most recent memory of him is just the meltdown in the playoffs. But when you look at his career as a whole, even if there's been some, key lack of progression in some certain areas, overall, I mean, he's still a very impactful player who's, I think, worth his contract. He's under team control for a while, so he's appealing to teams. From a Hawks perspective, too, he makes a lot of sense just because their defense is just so bad. I mean, they're one of the worst teams in the league, and they have one of the best offenses. So you could, if you start to zoom back a little bit, you can see how getting arguably the best perimeter defender in the league to elevate the floor on defense, and that could make the team overall more functional. They're really just trying to get to like a break-even point defensively, and that's something that Simmons could help with. So he's obviously someone that Hawks fans have had their eye on. He's someone that I think everyone has their eye on. He's like the big target right now. I mean, we'll see if a deal happens before the deadline or not, but definitely someone the Hawks are interested in.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the frustrations for me personally is just the lack of Simmons and the holdout and kind of the handling of it is the freshest thing in everyone's mind is the worst he's ever played in his career. And I think a lot of good would have come from if he had shown up, played a couple games, and just built a little reminder of what he can do, because he simply is not as bad a player as he showed in that series, regardless of what the many Philly fans and many of the public seem to make it. Some specific comments from the GM of the Atlanta Hawks, which these certainly pricked my ear up, and I have a quote here. He said, quote, "I think there's a belief that we're a good team. There's a belief that we can score, but right now there's no sense of urgency to make a stop, no sense of accountability. It's just not there. You guys watch the games. If somebody got scored on, they go down the other end. It doesn't bother them. It's a hard pill to swallow when your team is not playing as well as you think it should. Maybe I need to lower my expectations for this team. Ultimately, this all falls on my shoulders. I put this group together, and they're not responding. We need to take a deep look into this for sure." So do you agree with those comments? And do you think it's just kind of defense is the issue there? Is this a mentality thing, or is it a lot of all of the above?
Well, Schlenk is one of the more candid general managers in the league. He's always been someone who will generally speak his mind in interviews. Maybe, he's more candid than he should be at times, because he does give you like quotes like that. These quotes also fell before the recent 4-game winning streak. So you have to kind of keep that in mind, that was kind of coming at like the zenith of the season. But yeah, I mean, there's no way that you can look at their defense and be happy with how things have gone. One thing that does offer some optimism is, since Deandre Hunter began playing real starter minutes again over the last 5 games since his return from injury, they are 15th in defensive rating. And this has come against a stretch of playoff teams. It's obviously a very small sample, so you can't just expect that that's how things will go. But when you have a healthy Hunter to go along with Capella, it's easier to envision them being at least respectable defensively. But overall, when you have to take a holistic approach, when you have to look at the entire season long sample, and Simmons is obviously someone who can address that. I mean, he's deserves his accolades defensively. I've always, been so impressed with how he can defend guards like Trey, even at times. So he's somebody that would be a pretty natural fit just for that reason.
Yeah, and DeAndre Hunter is a guy I personally really like, and I think the Sixers should be grateful that he wasn't able to suit up in the postseason last year, because I do think that would have made a major difference. To dive into what I really want to talk about is the guy that I think appeals to me personally the most, and that we've heard plenty of whispers about, is John Collins there. And I guess to start with, there's been the feeling for, even dating back to last year, which is why I was pretty surprised to see Collins ink the long-term extension, but it feels like there's some sort of unhappiness between John Collins and the Hawks. Do you think that's fair to say?
Yeah, on some level, I do think that's true. I think that as the team became more successful towards the end of the last season, I think even if he had a diminishing role when you look at his usage and his scoring output, I think that's something he could be satisfied with, because they were making a deep playoff run. But then this year, when the fortunes have reversed, obviously he's not going to be as happy about his role. His usage right now is the lowest since his rookie year, and it sort of continues a trend of, ever since they're brought in Capella, he's losing some of his, his bread and butter pick and roll touches to Capella, and now they have a Congo too, who also can siphon off some of those touches. So right now, if you look at his play types on Synergy, his most common play is like a spot up. It's him posted up behind the arc, and that's just a role where even though he's a good shooter, he shot over 40% over the last 3 years. It's something that is probably not as optimal for him, because you want him going towards the basket, because he's naturally going to crop up in any kind of Simmons trade talk, just because, one, his salary, he makes an amount $25 million to aggregate in a trade for Simmons, and he's also, I would say probably comfortably in the league, so he's the type of player you'd be, looking to get back if you deal Simmons. I think probably in that kind of scenario, the Hawks are likely adding to that as well, just because I think the perception of Simmons is higher than the perception of Collins. So I think the Hawks would probably have the most natural guy to go out in any kind of Simmons trade.
Yeah. No, and I agree with that too. But personally, I think the most realistic that I think a deal that would be kind of put together would be somewhat of a three-way trade between the Kings and the Hawks. And I think the Sixers getting a combination of those pieces is something that I could see
Yeah.
fairly likely before the deadline. What do you think is John Collins' ceiling as a player?
That's a good question. In some ways, I think he reminds me a little bit of Chris Bosh. He doesn't quite have. I mean, Chris Bosh had like a decent handle, and Collins he doesn't have that, and he's not quite the team defender that Bosh was. But I think that's you can kind of see the outlines. I mean, Bosh kind of played sort of at the end of that era before like the spacing era really took off. You know, he started to shoot threes more towards the end of his career. But if he had played now, I think he would have taken a lot more. So I think that's probably, something like Bosh is probably his ceiling. He also has, some shades of Amari. If you kind of think back to how he was with the Suns being such a good pick and roll finisher with Nash in the same way that Collins is with Trey. And if you just go through the stats, I mean, that duo of Trey and Collins have just been incredible in pick and roll. I mean, it's the most assisted combo in the league over the last few years. You really can't say enough. It's one of the best plays in basketball when you can get him working the pick and roll with Trey with shooters around them. So naturally, he's somebody that when you look at his contract, he's locked up for 4 more years after this one. He's a player option on the last year. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how much better he will get from here just because he's already very good. I mean, further improvement, I think, would have to come from playmaking, which he's done better this year, and probably self-creation. He's still mostly a play finisher. So I think if you were to see like a ceiling outcome, it's him exploring those areas over the remainder of his deal.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one of my personal hesitancies with Collins is, I mean, first off, Trae Young, I don't think enough credit is given to just what a high IQ passer he is and how effective he is at picking apart defenses, making the right reads. I personally think it's more impressive than his shooting or scoring ability. It's just how clinical he is with that. And I think a lot of Collins' success is come from creation of that with the pick and roll, with the lobs, everything that comes with it. And one of my concerns, I guess, is the Sixers, frankly, don't have a guy that can do that to the same level. And their best guy that is a passer and a creator, and that is the guy that would likely be shipped off in Ben Simmons with that. So do you think like he still can be effective enough without kind of the heavy reliance on, like, I guess just purely pick and roll looks and that type of deal?
Yeah, I think that's a valid concern to have. I mean, on some level, for as good of a player as he is, I think that he probably wouldn't be quite as impactful if he didn't have a guard like Trey to just he has so much gravity in his direction that allows Collins to consistently like slip screens because of Trey's, threat to pull up. And I mean, when you look at who he's playing with, like Maxey just isn't the pick and roll passer that Trey is. Yeah. So it's natural to expect that there's going to be some translation issues coming from Atlanta. Especially playing with Embiid, who, will get a lot of post touches. So Collins' usage is not like a given there. So it is, I do think there are some fit concerns too, especially when you look at, what Philly's wider needs are, like perimeter creation. Collins isn't someone that's going to solve that. For me, if they traded for Collins, it would be more like, hey, like, let's get the best value that we can for Ben this year to help with like this playoff push. It's like if we can get a top 50 player back that we can put on the team, maybe we can find a partner for Tobias in that same transaction to, create some flexibility after this year, get some more pieces back. And then, the East is just so open this year. There's not like a juggernaut team you could talk yourself into with the way Embiid's playing, making that deep playoff run. So I think that's really like the impetus behind trading for Collins. It's not so much that you're addressing like clear team needs as much as you are making your team better for this playoffs with the way Embiid's going.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with that. And I mean, I brought up the Kings and Hawks 3-way deal. I think kind of the targets in that would be a combo of like Tyrese Halliburton and John Collins as what the Sixers are looking at for a return. I don't really think the Sixers will be interested in this without trading Tobias as well, but I think that's something they're totally trying to do right now. And frankly, I think Tobias is more likely to be traded than Ben before the deadline, which, I mean, it's interesting. I think in a lot of ways, this would be kind of a half-step trade from the Sixers to that eventual superstar, but it's also looking at it as guys that can continue to grow and be that player that maybe Morey is hoping that will be. But I'm on board with moving up the timeline because I think that there's enough of a chance and that Embiid has been so good that you have to go for it this year is where I personally sit on that.
Yeah, and that's the whole issue is just, I mean, you have Embiid playing like a top 3 player right now. I mean, arguably the best player since he came back. I think that's very much like a fair thing to say. And when you think about, again, like the East being open this year, it makes a lot of sense to push for it. Regarding the Hawks, it seems that they just are not going to take Tobias back. And that it's been reported that's sort of what scuttled like any further conversations with the Hawks regarding Simmons is they don't want to take Tobias. So I think, like you said, it would have to be some kind of 3-team deal with Tobias also going out. And that starts to become more complicated. And two, my personal interpretation of all of this is like a lot of Morey's actions, I think, make sense if you consider it through the lens of like he might be confident that he's getting Harden in the offseason. He might be okay. Like, hey, we might burn a year of prime Embiid, but we can have, he's still. You can still see him playing at this level for multiple more years. So you can talk yourself into saying, hey, if we can finally get that, that super guard creator like in Harden, maybe that's what we need to get over the hump. So I think some of his actions kind of make sense that he might be, confident of getting Harden. But I also think that, he doesn't want to take anything off the table. And if a team like Kings are willing to throw in, Halliburton and picks and things like that, then, he might be persuaded. But it's hard to read him, man. He's a very tough GM to evaluate.
Yeah, he is. And I also think there's an aspect to just how loud the hard noise has become. I think that is intentional on his part of let's push this markup to see before the deadline what it can be. Like, I think, for example, the Sacramento Kings should be a team sitting back right now being like, if he's cool with waiting for Harden for the deadline, like we should be throwing everything that we can right now to make this happen because we can't let this slip. And so I also think it's a lot of mind games with that. And who knows how much smoke is real or not. Another question about John Collin specifically. Do you believe that the shot is legitimate? Because, I mean, the numbers look good, like 40%, 3 straight years, you said. I guess what concerns me is the most attempts he's had in a year was 2 years ago now, which was 3.6 attempts per game. And he's never kind of eclipsed more than that, which one of the frustrations with Tobias Harris specifically paired along Embiid is just the kind of unwillingness to just catch and shoot and let it fly. And he's much more like a set yourself up. So do you think Collins can put it up at like a regular enough rate to make a legitimate factor in that?
Well, I think that to answer your question, it's sort of multiple things. Like you said, over the last 3 years, like if you look at all of his attempts, he has shot over 40%. So I think that's enough to say that, like, okay, he's a good shooter. The volume isn't very much, but he is a good shooter. However, with that being said, I mean, he's definitely, a spacing big as opposed to like a forward. He's not like a stretchy big wing type that can get up, 5+ threes a game. You'll occasionally see Collins with, take a lot of threes in a game if the defense is giving it to him, but that's, not his, his bread and butter. He likes to get to the basket. He's also not really someone who will like shoot, with a guy flying in his face, a very contested shot attempts. He's not that kind of 3-point shooter. So he's not, I would say, addressing that issue that you would like is somebody that's got a green light and is willing to like shoot, with a hand in his face. He's not that kind of guy. But I do think that he's proven to be repeatable.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, I personally like, I'm an on board with John Collins guy. Like the things that do appeal to me outside of, I mean, what we've kind of talked about already is like just the injection of athleticism into the Sixers lineup would be super refreshing. And also rebounding and defensively, just a guy that can take some responsibility off Embiid. Like it's so much to ask Embiid to be the anchor defensively and the motor on offense that if there can be a guy that can just sky up and get a rebound or sky across and give help defense, I think that would be super effective for them.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think, too, to your point, that really any kind of deal where they're getting Collins, I think has to entail Tobias going out. Because I mean, I just can't see Tobias like playing the three. I don't think he can guard threes. And obviously he plays the same position as Collins. So I think any kind of deal, any kind of framework like that has to see Tobias going out as well. And that could help with the overall fit.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. So it's going to be interesting to see how the deadline plays out and everything that happens. But I appreciate you hopping on and joining today. Definitely learned. I learned a little more. And so let everybody know where they can find you, where they can see your work, and where to follow you.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. It's always fun to talk with fans of other teams, writers of other teams, to get their perspectives. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm A Kelly there. ANDLANKELL is my handle. Just hit me up.
Perfect. Yeah, and we'll tag him and everything. So make sure you check out his work. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next time.